Welcome to our online Sunday experience and our November teaching series, How to Be Ordinary, Cultivating a Life of Depth and Simplicity Without Feeling Like a Failure. It's a practical 5-week series exploring the spiritual disciplines of solitude, silence, prayer, simplicity, and stability. The message you're about to hear was recorded live, and we hope it inspires you to join God in the renewal of all things.
With that all said and out of the way, this morning we begin a brand new 5-part series entitled How to Be Ordinary, Cultivating a Life of Depth and Simplicity Without Feeling Like a Failure. Now, as you may have noticed in our September and October teaching series, that we've made an intentional move in this past season to offer practical teaching that responds to the unique season that we find ourselves in. And that's why Allison has been up every week via video, offering some spiritual practices to put into play the things that we are learning. And this month is going to be no different. So over the course of the next 5 Sundays, we're going to explore and supplement the following practices. This morning we start with solitude, next week is silence, and then prayer, simplicity, and stability. And every week we're going to dive into one of those spiritual rhythms and offer you usable corresponding tools to try and to hopefully adopt the ones that actually work for you. But 2 quick things to keep in mind as we hop into this series. Number 1, these aren't new. We didn't invent these rhythms or spiritual practices. Christians have been doing these kinds of things for millennia. So if this is new to you, then welcome to the party. You're going to love it. Secondly, we, and I'm talking about especially me, are not experts or professionals in any one of these areas. As pastors, we are coming alongside you as fellow disciples, as co-journeyers. So everything we're going to share with you this month comes from a place of trial and error and success and failure. And all of that to say that we are in this together as brothers and sisters. You feel me on that? You picking that up? Make sense? Yeah? Good, good. So as we begin, let me just share with you one thought that's going to help frame where we're headed this morning and set the stage for the rest of the month. Thomas Merton says this: "Dare to be ordinary. Pride always longs to be unusual." That feels counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because who would dare to be ordinary in a world that demands that we stand out? Who would dare to be ordinary and fly below the radar when we live in a world where we take pictures of everything we do and publicize everything we do, whether it's what we're wearing or where we've been or where we're going or what we had for breakfast? Who would dare not draw attention to themselves, live simply, and go about quietly doing good, even if nobody knows or if nobody notices? Who would dare do such things? I'll tell you who. The follower of Jesus. That's who. And so this morning, we're going to begin to unpack this idea of ordinariness in the way of Jesus by introducing the spiritual practice of solitude. And we're going to begin in the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is led into the desert by the Spirit, where he is met by the temptation to be unordinary. Here's how the story goes. Next, Jesus was taken into the wild by the Spirit for the test. And the devil was ready to give it. And Jesus prepared for the test by fasting 40 days and 40 nights. That left him, of course, in a state of extreme hunger, which the devil took advantage of in the first test. "Since you are God's son, speak the word that will turn these stones into loaves of bread." And Jesus answered by quoting Deuteronomy, "It takes more than bread to stay alive. It takes a steady stream of the words from God's mouth." For the second test, the devil took him to the holy city. He sat him on top of the temple and said, "Since you are God's son, jump." The devil goaded him by quoting Psalm 91. "He has placed you in the care of angels. They will catch you so that you won't so as much stub your toe on a stone." And Jesus countered with another citation from Deuteronomy. "Don't you dare test the Lord your God." For the third test, the devil took him out to the peak of a huge mountain. He gestured expansively, pointing out all the earth's kingdoms, how glorious they all were. And then he said, "They're yours, lock, stock, and barrel. Just go down on your knees and worship me, and they're yours." Jesus' refusal was curt. "Beat it, Satan." He backed his rebuke with the third quotation from Deuteronomy: "Worship the Lord your God and only him. Serve him with absolute single-heartedness." The test was over, the devil left, and in his place, angels came and took care of Jesus' needs. Now, this is a weird story. And what do we do with a story like this? What does it mean for you and I? Biblical scholars will take this story and they'll usually categorize it in one of these three places. Some will say that this is a story about how Jesus is going to succeed where the Hebrews, the people of Israel, failed. The setting is back in the desert. That's a familiar setting for Israel. They wandered in circles for 40 years. The desert is a place that is desolate. Nothing lives there. It is dangerous. But now Jesus is in that same desert, and he's going to show us how to get it done and how to get it done right. Another group of scholars would say that this story is more about Satan trying to get Jesus off track. The goal is to get Jesus to take a shortcut to messiahship and avoid suffering and thus short-circuit his God-given mission. Okay, makes sense. The third category is this, that some read this story as a model for overcoming temptation and how Jesus, through his example, shows us how we can defeat evil by embracing Scripture and trusting God. And all those approaches are great, they all make sense, they're sound, and they fit. But for our purposes today, let me offer you another way to approach this text. And I want to focus in on exactly what the Satan offers the Christ. The first thing he says is this, that turn these stones into bread. And at all times, when we read the scriptures, we have to remember that context plays a big part in what we're seeing and what we're learning. So the context here is this, Jesus is hungry. 40 days of fasting in the wilderness. Jesus is hungry. He is living in an age where many people went hungry. So if Jesus had performed this miracle, it would have made him the talk of the town, an important figure, a necessary figure. So the temptation here is for Jesus to be relevant. That is, for people to look at him for all the amazing things that he can do for them, for Jesus to be their hero. And to that offer, Jesus says, no thanks. That's not the way this works. There is a better way. In the second temptation, the challenge is for Jesus to jump off this high peak, presumably so that he could fly or be carried to safety. What's the context here? The context is, during that time, there were magicians who claimed that they had the ability to fly. So if Jesus had performed this stunt, that would have placed him amongst a very select group, a small, select group of impressive people. So the temptation here for Jesus was to be spectacular, to show off his powers and win a following of mesmerized people, to be an influencer, to use a modern social media term. And again, to that offer, Jesus says, no, that is not the way it works. There is a better way. And so Jesus is finally tempted with this view and with this promise that he could own and rule everything in sight. Okay, what's the context here? What's going on? The context is this, that in a world of competing political revolutionaries, Jesus is now offered control of what everyone else is trying to take control of. So the temptation here is for Jesus to be powerful, to be the strongest, to have everyone submit to him, only if he submits to a lesser power. And again, to that offer, Jesus says, no, not on your life, Satan. That's not how this works. There is a better way. So to summarize the temptations, they are, be a hero, be an influencer, be powerful. And to all those temptations, Jesus says, no, that's not the way it works. There's a better way. But what's at the heart of the matter here? Because being heroic or being a good influence or having a measure of power aren't necessarily evil things in and amongst themselves. So what is actually happening, and what does it mean for you and I? I think if we begin to peel back the layers a little bit, we'll begin to see that, hey, the way or the destination, the way we get to power or influence, there's something about that that's important. The destination is not only the goal, but there's something about how we get there that's important. There's something about how you and I project ourselves, how we want people to see us, how we want to be admired. There's something about the things we do to construct a persona, how people recognize us, or for those of us in the business world, how our brand or image is formed. So then, when we find ourselves chasing importance, or scrounging for affirmation, or always trying to fight for control, maybe, as Merton suggests, maybe that's pride at play. And as he says, pride always longs to be unusual. And we know that pride is at work when we long for importance and influence and power for all the wrong reasons. This may help clarify it for us. Henry Nouwen says that we have a compulsion towards ongoing and increasing affirmation. Who am I? I am the one who is liked, praised, admired, disliked, hated, or despised. Whether I'm a pianist, a business person, or a minister, what matters is how I am perceived by my world. If being busy is good, it's a good thing, then I must be busy. If having money is a sign of real freedom, then I must claim my money. If knowing many people proves my importance, I will have to make the necessary contacts. The compulsion manifests itself in the lurking fear of failure and the steady urge to prevent this by gathering more of the same: more work, more money, and more friends. The line that sticks out to me in that quote there is that lurking fear of failure. If that isn't the biggest driver behind pride or the need to be important or influential or powerful, I don't know what is. And like Nouwen says, we collect the right things. We collect the right people so we can project a certain version of ourselves to the world, hoping that maybe in some way that will hide or stave off this fear of failure for one more day. However, for those of us who are genuinely trying to follow Jesus, eventually we come to a point in our lives where we have to face into that lurking fear of failure. We have to face into our pride and everything we have spent a lifetime building to hide our insecurities. Can I share a little personal story along those lines? Thank you. I had a bit of a moment a few months ago, and I want to bring you into that. So I'll set the stage, I'll set the context. How about that? It's April, last April, maybe the second or third week. So bring your mind back to that. There's snow on the ground, obviously. Thanks a lot, Saskatchewan. COVID is like 3-4 weeks in. Everyone's sort of feeling unsettled. No one knows exactly what's going on. And all of our normal rhythms are upside down, including what we do here on Sundays. So usually on Sundays, I stand right here. This is where I stand on Sundays. This is my office. And you usually sit where you are. We're here together. But as you remember, we weren't doing that in April. So on that particular Sunday morning in April, it was early, 7:30 or 8. That's usually the time where I'm getting ready or I'm about to come over to the church. But because there was no church, because we had recorded the sermon and everything was already going, well, I was in my favorite chair at home with a cup of coffee, and with a book. It was that Thomas Merton book that I grabbed that quote from earlier because I felt I needed some sort of stability, some sort of rhythm to Sunday morning to keep myself engaged, to be open to God, because we were missing this. And I don't know about you, but I didn't feel like watching myself on the internet. Maybe you didn't feel like doing that either. Who knows? Don't tell me, okay? So here's the moment. I'm in my favorite chair. It's April. There's snow on the ground. I got my book. I've got my coffee. It is quiet. The kids are asleep. And I'm beginning to read about pride. I'm beginning to read about insecurities. I'm beginning to read about how sometimes we chase importance and power and influence. And then all of a sudden it hit me. Like it hit me so hard that I just put my book down. I kept my finger in the spot where I was reading, and I started to stare out the window. Because I had this sense, I had this feeling, I would say this is God's Spirit speaking to me. And the question that was asked was this: hey, everything you've done in your life, everything you've done in particular in your working life, in your ministry, has it all been motivated by pride? Have you been driven by that need to be important and loved? Are you driven by influence? Are you driven by power? What insecurities are you hiding, Joe? And that was like a blow to my soul in the moment. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't waiting for that. It just seemed to come out of nowhere. So again, I began to retrace steps in my mind. Maybe you've done that too. There's like a Rolodex in your mind. You flip right back. And I'm thinking, okay, think about it. When you were a first pastor, what were you like? What were you like with those students in that church, in that place, and the next church, and the next place, and all the things that you've done, and all the sweat and effort and everything you have put together? Why did you do those things? How were you motivated? Who were you doing it for? And I began to recognize that, hey, there was something special about that moment. I guess maybe about how it happened, really, because we were out of our normal routines. All the regular stimulus was gone. And I'm sitting there by myself, reading, coffee, it's quiet. And it seems like in that moment there was just this very small opening, just a very small opening to look inward. And it's as if God's Spirit was just waiting for me to be still enough, to be quiet enough, to be open enough. Now, I do and I do not like going to those places because it's hard. It's hard to look into your own soul, to look into your own motivation, to begin to dig up some of your stuff. So I sat with that question on that day and in the days following. Since that time, I've shared some of the details with some trusted friends, and I'm still sitting with it today. I'm not necessarily on the other side of it. And what's weird is that moment has led to other moments of quiet, but also some moments that actually, when I am working or when I am out there, I hear this whisper in my soul like, what are you doing? What are you up to there? Who are you doing that for? Is that for you? Or is that for me? So that's led to what I believe is just this gentle unfolding of my soul. Just so gentle. This isn't God shaking his fist. This is God gently speaking to me. And I feel like whenever else I create that space to be open, to be receptive, my insides God just slightly unfolds me a little bit further. And sometimes I go with it and I allow God's Spirit to speak and I take in as much as I can. And other times I'm like, nope, cannot do this today. And I slam that book shut. I can't go there. I feel like I slam it shut because I'm worried, because I'm afraid. I don't want to see what's there. I don't want to uncover it. I don't want to see what it brings up. And yet, what I'm beginning to learn is that in those fearful spots, when I'm facing into pride, when I'm facing into my own stuff, it seems to me, in my experience, That's when God's voice speaks the loudest. And I'll be honest with you, I reluctantly share all of that with you because my pride says, shh, 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 don't tell them that. My insecurities say, that's not the kind of stuff you want to share. That's not great for job security, Joe. Because the pride part of me, the part I want to project, the powerful, influential, important hero part of me wants to say, hey, look at me. Yes, I got my life dialed in. Perfect spouse, perfect parent. Oh, my goodness, I never lose my cool while I'm driving. That never happens. I've always been a great coworker. I never eat too much. I never drink too much. I always spend my money responsibly. I never do anything that is dumb. Why are you laughing? Because you've experienced some of that dumbness, haven't you? But the projection I want you to have of me is that I've got it all together. I want you to love me. I want you to like me. So I create this persona that says, hey, look at me. And I can do all the things that you want me to do. But I recognize that's my pride. That's the stuff the Spirit is calling me away from. And as I allow for those quiet spaces, those quiet, small spaces to be open, as I do that kind of thing with greater regularity, I feel like even now, after 30 years of being a follower of Jesus, I'm just beginning to understand this better way that Jesus offers. And this morning, that's what I want to invite you into. Whether you're already practicing this on a regular basis or you haven't practiced it in some time. And that invitation comes to us this morning through the practice of solitude. Here's a very quick and simple definition. Richard Foster says, solitude is more a state of mind and heart than it is a place. There is solitude of the heart that can be maintained at all times. Crowds or the lack of them have little to do with this inward attentiveness. Solitude liberates us from the inane chatter that is so characteristic of our modern life. We are set free from the many false selves we have built up in order to cope with the expectations others place on us and we place upon ourselves. So then, in solitude, you have nothing to prove and nobody to impress. Solitude is that sacred space where you make room to go deep, to the places where you are most vulnerable, the places where you are broken, the places where you suffer, the places where you don't want to go. Solitude becomes this inner sanctum where you allow God to speak and to deal with your stuff. But remember, solitude is not privacy. It might begin when you're alone and quiet, but it doesn't stay there. Because again, this is from my experience, and perhaps it's yours as well. I have heard God's voice most clearly in my life through the voices of my trusted friends with whom I feel safe to confess what the Spirit is calling out and refining inside of me. Because solitude is a place of conversion. One author I read this week described it as the furnace of transformation. And I love that. That's perfect. Because in solitude, in the moments where you allow yourself to be unguarded before God, in those moments where you give up trying to be important or influential or powerful, in those moments, the old you starts to die and burn away as the new you slowly emerges. For solitude is part of the better way that Jesus offers. And that, my friends, is what ordinary Christians do. We make room for God to speak.
So, what are some of the ways we can make room for God to speak? Well, our best tool to do this is solitude, aloneness. In fact, the passage that Joe used for our teaching this morning says that Jesus went into the desert. And the word desert in this passage is Aramea in the original language. It means not just a place with sand dunes and tumbleweeds, but a solitude, an uninhabited place. And we, like Jesus, are invited to the desert, to an uninhabited place, a place of solitude, to shake loose of our temptation for and our attachment to, control, admiration, security, and comfort, and find freedom. So, what is solitude? Well, it's a time when we withdraw from other people, when we are alone. But it also means time set apart without distractions to intentionally face our inner world with all of the chaos, worry, shame, and fear that might exist there. And to be present to God at the same time in the midst of all of this. And this is why we practice solitude. Because every day we are unintentionally and without our notice being molded by the patterns of the world. And as a result, instead of being free, we are actually becoming attached to compulsions that more often than not, we're not even aware of. Additionally, we also have a default mode for self-deception. And without solitude, we start to believe our own press, good or bad, about ourselves and about others. In solitude, we open up space to meet with a loving God, but also to face the ways that sin and deception have started to take root in our lives. All of this in the presence of a loving God. You see, in solitude, God leads us into self-awareness as He shows our known selves to us, which is another point about solitude. It is a time when we intentionally open ourselves up to God, not just when we visit our inner selves. So we're not just left with our own inner chaos all on our own. We are doing this along with God and in God's loving presence. Solitude for most of us is a scary invitation because what we face in solitude is what we spend most of our lives trying to avoid. But the fruit of it is that as we face what is lurking in the depths of our being, God realigns our identity and our motivations and our calling so that we can live freely and with compassion in the world. So, how do we practice solitude? Well, some of us will only be able to handle a little bit of solitude to begin with, and that's okay. We need to start where we can. Some of us will start with 5 minutes, and some of us will be able to do a little longer, and all of us will be able to add time to our period of solitude as we learn to sink into it and trust God's presence with us. So if you're just starting with this practice, I encourage you to take stock of your life and find the times that are actually built into your life right now where you could practice aloneness or solitude. Perhaps you're up early in the morning or late at night. Maybe you have a commute to work, or maybe you have to sit in the car while your kids are at gymnastics or hockey practice. Decide to use this time as your desert place. Turn off the radio, turn off Netflix, put aside your phone, and enter into this time intentionally and prayerfully without agenda. You might also want to take some time to acknowledge the ways that you avoid being alone. Some of us might be on our phones all the time. Some of us might always need to have people around us. It might be really hard for us to leave our families, or we might have an addiction even to noise. I have the radio on a lot, and I've done this for years. And I acknowledge the fact that listening to the radio is a way that I avoid the feelings of isolation and loneliness when I'm by myself. If I were to turn the radio off, I would probably find lots of time for solitude. So, here's how you might practice your time of solitude. Let's say, for instance, the time you choose is your drive time. Once you're settled and on your way, you might start your time by praying a simple prayer. God, in this time of solitude, would you reveal to me who I really am, the one you see and love just as I am, and not some other person or cleaned up version of myself. And then just sit in the solitude and silence. Now, you may find that you have a lot of stuff bubble up. Anger and irritation with other people, shame about your past, fear and worry about your future. And that's actually a pretty normal experience. One teacher I sat under said that these times of prayer are a little like taking out the garbage. We have bags and bags of resentment and anger and grief and worry weighing us down. We've ignored and repressed these feelings, and it doesn't mean they don't exist. It's just kind of like hiding them in the garage. And then solitude is like opening the garage and finding we've stuffed so much in there, it spills out as soon as we unlatch the door. And so letting these things bubble up is like taking out the garbage bags one by one. We let them come up and then release them as we're able. And as we do this, more space will open up inside of us, and there will be more room for God. Now, as you build on your practice of solitude, you can add to it. You might take a morning out, or a day, or even a weekend. Whenever you've had a time of solitude, I suggest you reflect on it somehow. You might journal or take note of your thoughts, your feelings, and your reactions, and then offer those to God in prayer as well, and notice if there are patterns of behavior that just keep popping up. And remember too, when you enter your time of solitude, that your job is just to stay still. This isn't a time where you have to dig or a time really of introspection. Instead, it is about allowing God to show our known selves to us. And you're going to have to be intentional to carve out solitude. Mostly, this does not happen by accident. Most of our spiritual growth doesn't happen by accident. So we have to put in the effort. So this week, unless you're in quarantine, make a plan to practice solitude. I read this story of Nasreddin, a folklore character in some Middle Eastern traditions, this week. And the story goes like this. One evening, Nasreddin arrived home to discover that he had lost his house key. So he began searching for it and looking for it on the ground around him. As he searched, he realized that the light was better on the street under the street lamps, so he moved his search there. Then a neighbor passed by and asked Nasreddin what he was searching for. And Nasreddin replied, "My house key, I've lost it." After they searched for some time, the neighbor finally asked, "Where did you lose your house key?" And Nasreddin replied, "Well, I think I left it in the house." So the neighbor asked, "Then why are we searching out here?" "Because the light is better," Nasreddin replied. We're not unlike Nasreddin. We are tempted to search for what we need out there, where it is well lit, where we are familiar with the territory, when what we really need is in here, in the unexplored dark places. Solitude is our invitation to enter the dark, deserted, lonely place inside of us and find that as we do so, we discover the ground of reality is not the shaky things that we've built out here in the world, but in the unexplored places, the places we try to avoid. As we learn to visit these places in solitude, along with our loving God, I pray that we will find just what we're looking for.
Thanks for tuning in this week. If you need prayer, reach out to us at prayer@lakeviewchurch.com. And if you're new and you have questions, email us at new@lakeviewchurch.com. And if Lakeview is home for you, and if you believe in what God is up to in and through our church, we ask you would give as you are able at lakeviewchurch.com/give. See you next Sunday.